Saint Maria Goretti was born on October 16, 1890, in Corinaldo, a small village in Italy. The daughter of Luigi Goretti and Assunta Carlini, she grew up in a humble and deeply Catholic family. From her earliest years, Maria showed a pure heart and an inclination toward prayer and charity. Her simple life reflected the serenity that the Christian faith can provide even amid poverty. When Maria was only 6 years old, the family had to move in search of better working conditions. They went to the Nettuno region, where they rented land and began working as farmers. The move was full of challenges, but also represented the hope of a more dignified life. There, Maria began to show maturity and responsibility far beyond her age. Maria's mother, Assunta, was her greatest example of faith and courage. She raised her children in the fear of God, teaching them the importance of prayer, honesty, and purity. While she worked hard in the fields, Assunta still found time to pray with the children and instill in them trust in divine providence. This home environment forged Maria's character. Luigi, the father, was a hard-working and kind man, but his poor health caused him great suffering. Despite the difficulties, he tried to keep up his spirits and encourage the family. His paternal presence, though marked by frailty, was a source of security for Maria, who saw in him an example of silent sacrifice. Over time, the financial difficulties increased. The Goretti family began sharing their house with another worker, Giovanni Serenelli, who lived with his son Alessandro. That coexistence would deeply mark Maria's life. Even so, the young girl maintained her sweetness and joy, always willing to help in whatever was necessary. From an early age, Maria showed great spiritual sensitivity. She liked to spend moments in prayer and had a special devotion to the Virgin Mary. Her childhood companions remembered her always serene countenance and the firmness with which she said she would rather die than offend God. Life in the countryside was arduous. Maria helped her mother with household tasks and looked after her younger siblings. Despite the tiring work, she found time to attend Mass and learn the Catechism. She was a child who radiated goodness and was greatly concerned for the well-being of others. In 1900, Maria's father became gravely ill with malaria. The disease progressed rapidly, sapping his strength. During that period, Maria showed remarkable inner strength, consoling her mother and helping care for her father. It was a time of testing, but also of spiritual growth for the girl. Luigi's death in the same year was a hard blow for the whole family. Assunta was left alone with 6 children and mounting debts. Maria, then only 9, took an even more responsible stance. She became a real support for her mother and an example of Christian resignation. Despite the sorrow, the family persevered. Courageously, Assunta continued working in the fields while Maria cared for the house and her younger siblings. The girl learned early the virtue of renunciation and the value of sacrifice, never losing her joy. Her faith made bearable the sufferings imposed by life. Neighbors often noticed Maria's spirit of service. Even in poverty, she sought to share the little she had with those even more in need. Many times she was seen offering bread to hungry children or consoling those who were sad. Her charity was already standing out as an essential trait of her personality. At night, Maria knelt beside her bed and prayed fervently. She asked God for strength to be faithful and to help her family. That deep life of prayer nourished her soul and prepared her unknowingly for the heroic witness she would give a few years later. One of the most significant moments of her childhood was her first communion. At only 11, she received Jesus in the Eucharist with great emotion. She prepared carefully, fasting and confessing humbly. That meeting with Christ was a source of courage for all that would follow. Maria began to attend Mass whenever she could. She said she never wanted to miss it, for there she found the strength to remain pure and obedient. Her devotion to the Blessed Sacrament became increasingly intense, as did her love for the Mother of God. Alessandro Serenelli, the son of the man who shared the house with the Gorettis, began to show worrying behaviors. Although much older than Maria, he began to watch her with disordered intentions. The girl, however, avoided any improper contact and showed firmness in the face of his advances. Once, Maria confided to her mother that she did not feel comfortable with Alessandro. Assunta, worried, tried to keep watch, but the hard labor made it difficult to be present at every moment. Maria, meanwhile, showed no fear, only caution. Even surrounded by such challenging circumstances, Maria kept her serenity. Her greatest desire was to remain faithful to God and protect her purity. These virtues made her a light in the harsh environment in which she lived, radiating peace where roughness reigned. Neighbors testified to her virtuous character. They said Maria seemed a little angel, always willing to do good. Her childhood was marked by an impressive spiritual maturity that shone through her gestures and words. It was common to find her praying the rosary with devotion. She asked the Blessed Virgin to protect and strengthen her in faith. The Mother of Heaven was her great intercessor and companion in all circumstances, a silent presence that sustained her in moments of trial. Despite all the risks she ran, Maria never allowed her heart to be filled with rancor or fear. Her example of trust in providence impressed everyone who knew her. The girl taught by her life that God never abandons those who love him sincerely. Maria also had great zeal for her siblings. When any of them showed laziness or disobedience, she gently exhorted them, always pointing to the example of Jesus. Her love for the family was deep and manifested itself in the small, everyday attitudes. Her intelligence and dedication to catechism drew attention. The local priest was impressed by her answers, always full of faith and understanding. Maria was not just an obedient girl, but a soul illuminated by the love of God. While life followed its seemingly simple course, Maria's heart was becoming ever more prepared for heroism. She did not know that she would soon have to seal with blood her commitment to purity and fidelity to the gospel. The seeds of holiness had been planted in childhood and were growing silently. Each act of sacrifice, each prayer, and each upright choice formed the inner fortress that would sustain Maria at the decisive moment of her life. Thus, Saint Maria Goretti's childhood was a garden of virtues cultivated in the arid soil of poverty and suffering. That phase prepared the way for the testimony of purity and forgiveness that would make her one of the most beloved saints of the Catholic Church. With time, Alessandro Serenelli became increasingly obsessed with Maria. He was 20, while she was barely 12. His disturbed mind, fed by immoral readings and disordered thoughts, created fantasies that contrasted with Maria's innocence and purity. Alessandro began making malicious comments and tried to get close to her whenever he could. Maria reacted with firmness and courage, withdrawing and making it clear she accepted no intimacy. Even so, Alessandro persisted, convinced he could break the resistance of that girl. Maria's mother, Assunta, perceived the risk, but the need to work in the fields prevented her from watching her daughter all the time. It was an anguishing situation. Maria, however, did not give in to fear. She preferred to continue helping her mother and caring for her siblings, entrusting herself entirely to God. On some occasions, Alessandro made direct proposals. He promised that no one would know, trying to convince her there was no problem. Maria, with firmness of soul and clarity of conscience, replied that she would rather die than commit sin. Her voice remained calm but determined. This confrontation repeated itself several times, increasing the tension. Maria even cried after Alessandro bothered her, but she never showed resentment. Her only concern was not to offend God and to guard her purity, which she considered a precious gift. Some neighbors noticed that Alessandro stared at her insistently. However, at that time and in that rural environment, many such situations were ignored or hushed up. The exhausting work and living conditions made effective protection difficult. Even so, Maria kept her heart serene. She prayed even more intensely, giving her fears to Our Lady. On silent nights, she knelt beside her bed and asked for courage. She felt no hatred for Alessandro, but she feared his persistence. Alessandro, for his part, felt her refusal as an affront. He could not accept that such a young girl had so much willpower. His wounded pride turned into resentment and frustration, fermenting in the darkness of his heart. The morning of July 5th, 1902, dawned like any other. Maria's mother went to work in the fields with some of the younger children. Alessandro knew the girl would stay home alone, tending to household chores and her little brother, and he decided to put his plan into action. That morning, Maria was doing small tasks. While kneading dough for lunch, she prayed softly. Her heart was at peace, although she sensed something bad might happen. When she heard heavy footsteps approaching, she felt a chill run down her spine. Alessandro entered the house determined. He locked the door behind him and said no one would hear her screams. He ordered Maria to give in to his desires. She, in a firm voice, replied that it was a sin and that God did not want that. She insisted that he not commit such evil. Enraged, Alessandro dragged Maria to a corner of the kitchen. She resisted with all her strength, shouting that she would rather die. Her words were, "No, no, it is a sin. God does not want this." Realizing he could not force her, he became even more furious. Grabbing an iron file, Alessandro threatened her. When Maria continued screaming and struggling, he lost all control. He seized a sharp-pointed knife and in his blind fury struck her repeatedly, wounding her in various parts of the body. Maria fell to the floor, gravely injured. Even so, she still found strength to try to protect her purity with her hands, covering herself as best she could. Alessandro, seeing the girl almost unconscious, finally ran off, leaving her bleeding on the floor. The little brother who was in the house began to cry desperately. The screams caught the neighbors' attention, and soon people arrived to help. When Assunta was told, she ran as fast as she could. Upon arrival, she found her daughter mortally wounded but conscious. While being carried to an improvised hospital, Maria uttered words that would deeply move all who witnessed her agony. She did not lament the pain. She only said she preferred to die rather than sin. Her only concern was for Alessandro's soul. The doctor tried to do everything possible, but the stabs had hit vital organs. Before losing consciousness, Maria was invited by the priest to forgive her attacker. Her answer, with a trembling voice and a look of peace, was, "Yes, for the love of Jesus I forgive him, and I want him to be with me in paradise." Those words deeply impressed the witnesses. Even suffering atrocious pains, Maria showed no hatred or desire for revenge. Her heart remained pure to the end, wholly surrendered to God and to charity. In the hours that followed, Maria received Holy Communion as viaticum. It was her last encounter with Jesus in the Eucharist. With weak breathing, she murmured little prayers. Her gaze remained fixed on the crucifix she held in her wounded hands. As evening fell, her suffering reached its peak. Still, Maria did not stop praying. She told the priest she trusted that Our Lady would take her to heaven. Her last words were, "I am waiting for her. I am waiting for her," referring to the Mother of Heaven. On July 6, 1902, at only 11 years and 9 months old, Saint Maria Goretti surrendered her soul to the Creator. The small room became a sacred place, marked by the heroism of a child who preferred to die rather than lose virtue. News spread quickly through the region. Everyone was appalled by the brutality of the crime, but also deeply edified by Maria's spiritual strength. Her testimony of forgiveness and purity echoed throughout Italy. Maria's burial was attended by a crowd. Simple men and women wept beside the little white coffin. Many already called her a saint, convinced her death had been the martyrdom of an innocent soul. Meanwhile, Alessandro was arrested and taken to trial. He confessed the crime coldly. However, he did not show immediate remorse. Only years later would his heart open to grace through the intercession of the one he had mortally wounded. Thus ended the brief earthly life of Saint Maria Goretti. But a powerful example of holiness and forgiveness was born, one that would inspire generations. Her story would become a symbol of the triumph of grace over sin and of light that shines in darkness. After Maria's murder, Alessandro Serenelli was taken by the authorities to prison. At first, he remained cold and indifferent. To him, the crime had been merely the consequence of an obsession he could not control. During the trial, he showed little emotion and seemed not to understand the gravity of what he had done. The court heard witnesses who spoke of Maria's purity and goodness. The prosecutor described in detail the brutality of the attack and emphasized that the girl had died defending her chastity. The judge, impressed by the case, handed down a sentence of 30 years in prison. Alessandro was sent to a maximum security penitentiary. The first years in prison were marked by rebellion and solitude. He felt wronged, believing Maria had provoked his anger with her resistance. That thought revealed the hardness still occupying his heart. Meanwhile, the Goretti family lived their mourning with great Christian resignation. Assunta, the mother, despite piercing pain, repeatedly said she forgave Alessandro. She said her daughter had died a martyr and that it was necessary to pray for the one who had hurt her. This attitude surprised neighbors and inspired compassion. As months passed, Maria's story spread throughout Italy. Reports of her courage and her forgiveness attracted the attention of the Catholic press and of parishes. Many faithful already referred to her as a martyr of purity, and pilgrimages began to visit her humble tomb. In prison, Alessandro received letters and visits from missionaries urging him to repent. At first, he showed no interest, but solitude, combined with the constant memory of Maria's words, "I forgive you," began to crack his inner resistance. After about 8 years of confinement, Alessandro had a dream that changed his life. He saw Maria in a flowered garden, smiling and offering him white lilies. On waking, he felt a peace he had never experienced. For the first time, he wept and acknowledged the horror of his sin. From that moment, Alessandro radically changed his behavior. He began to cooperate with the guards, refused privileges, and gave himself to a life of penance. He started writing letters, asking forgiveness, and praying daily through the intercession of the one he had killed. During one pastoral visit, Alessandro confessed his sincere repentance to a priest. He declared that he understood he had destroyed an innocent life and accepted any suffering as reparation. That confession marked the beginning of his true conversion. At the same time, Maria's fame for holiness grew. Many testified to graces obtained through her intercession. Sick children, families in crisis, and young people tempted by impurity turned to her memory with confidence. The little martyr was becoming a beacon of hope for many hearts. The process of beatification began to take shape. priests collected testimonies about her life and the heroic circumstances of her martyrdom. Her unconditional forgiveness was recognized as proof of extraordinary virtue. In 1928, Alessandro finished serving his sentence and was released. He was then 50 years old. His first decision was to seek out Assunta Goretti. He knocked on her door with trembling hands, and upon being received by Maria's mother, fell to his knees, begging forgiveness in tears. The scene moved everyone present. Assunta raised Alessandro and, with a choked voice, declared that Maria had already forgiven him before dying, and that she forgave him as well. That moment was like a silent sacrament of reconciliation and healing. From then on, Alessandro asked to be received as a lay brother in a Capuchin convent. He lived there his remaining years in prayer, penance, and humility. He accepted serenely the condition of one who carried the weight of an irreparable crime on his shoulders, but trusted in divine mercy. Meanwhile, Maria Goretti's tomb became an ever more frequent place of pilgrimage. Young people in particular felt touched by the example of the girl who was not afraid to defend her dignity. A devotion was born there that would spread worldwide. In 1947, after a rigorous canonical process, Pope Pius XV beatified Maria Goretti in a solemn ceremony. He declared her a model of Christian purity and a martyr of chastity, recalling that her courage had been sustained by love for Christ and unwavering faith. The beatification celebration gathered thousands of faithful. Many wept as they heard again the story of that simple child who preferred death to offending God. Catholic newspapers published special editions highlighting the transforming power of God's grace. In 1950, only 3 years later, Maria was canonized by the same pope. St. Peter's Square was completely filled with pilgrims from every corner of the world. It was the first time that a mother, Assunta Goretti, attended the canonization of her own daughter. During the canonization homily, Pius XIV urged young people to look to Maria Goretti as a luminous example of fidelity to purity. He declared that in a world tempted by materialism and sensuality, the saint's testimony was a call to human dignity. The image of Maria, crowned with white lilies, became a symbol of the victory of innocence over violence. Churches, schools, and religious congregations began to be dedicated to her name. Her devotion quickly spread through Europe, Latin America, and Asia. Alessandro Serenelli attended the canonization from afar, in silence. Later, he declared that he lived in peace because Maria had been raised to the altars. He said he felt her forgiveness as a continuous embrace that sustained him in daily penance. Alessandro's last years were of deep recollection. He worked in the convent as a gardener, prayed at length, and practiced small penances. Before dying, he wrote a public letter urging young people to avoid the readings and vices that had led him to crime. Alessandro's letter said that sin destroys the soul and that only God can restore a hardened heart. His final testimony served to confirm even more the greatness of the forgiveness granted by Maria. The example of that extraordinary reconciliation touched countless hearts throughout the 20th century. The story of Maria Goretti and Alessandro Serenelli also became a story of hope. The certainty that mercy can transform even the greatest sinner. Thus, the legacy of Saint Maria Goretti is not limited to the martyrdom of purity. It is also the legacy of Christian forgiveness, of unwavering trust in God's love, and of the transforming power of faith lived to the full. After the canonization, devotion to Saint Maria Goretti spread rapidly through parishes and Catholic communities. She became the patroness of youth, purity, and victims of violence. Many young people found in her example strength to face temptations and moral challenges. Churches dedicated to Saint Maria Goretti were built in various countries. Her name began to inspire parish communities, schools, and orphanages. Her testimony became a universal symbol of hope and human dignity beyond cultural barriers. Her shrine in Nettuno, Italy, received and continues to receive millions of pilgrims who come to pray beside the tomb where her mortal remains rest. There, in silence, many feel the peace that flows from her total surrender to God. Reports of graces obtained through Maria Goretti's intercession are countless. Physical healings, conversions, family reconciliations, and overcoming addictions are witnessed by devotees. People recognize that her martyrdom possesses a special spiritual power. Her liturgical feast is celebrated on July the 6th, the date of her birth into heaven. On that day, in many churches, processions and masses are held in honor of the little martyr. Young people, children, and entire families unite to give thanks and ask for her intercession. Pope Pius X, who canonized her, made a point of emphasizing that Maria Goretti was not only an innocent victim, but above all, a heroine of faith. Her conscious decision to prefer death to sin became an example for all Christians. The 20th century was marked by a culture that often relativized the importance of purity and chastity. In this context, Maria's life rose as a testimony against the trivialization of the body and human dignity. Her story became prophetic. Religious congregations were inspired by her example. Some women's communities adopted her name as a reference for youthful holiness and defense of life. Thus, Maria's charism extended its fruits within the church. Many young people who face identity crises and social pressure turn to Saint Maria Goretti as model and intercessor. She testifies that even amid violence and injustice, it is possible to remain faithful to the truth and to God's love. Maria's example of forgiveness is another central aspect of her sanctity. She did not die with resentment, but with her heart open to mercy. That attitude continues to challenge every Christian to live charity to its ultimate consequences. Maria's life also recalls the importance of Christian education in the home. Her parents, especially her mother Assunta, transmitted to her the value of prayer and trust in God. It was that solid foundation that sustained her when the time of extreme trial arrived. In Brazil, Saint Maria Goretti became known and loved. Many pastoral communities, youth groups, and catechetical programs spread her story to awaken love for purity and forgiveness in hearts. Her image is common in chapels and home altars. In recent times, her testimony has been remembered within discussions about violence against women. Her life and death evoke the need to defend female dignity and to educate boys in respect and responsibility. Documentaries, films, and books have been produced to tell her story. Works such as the film Cielo sulla palude, Heaven Over the Marsh, helped to spread her example, touching thousands with a simple and truthful language. Pope John Paul II also referred to Maria Goretti, emphasizing that her testimony is very relevant and necessary today. He recalled that Maria's courage sprang from a living faith and unconditional trust in Christ. The saint's relics have already been taken on pilgrimage to several countries. In each place, crowds gather to venerate her remains, asking for the grace to live chastity and forgiveness with the same heroism she demonstrated. Maria's spirituality invites us not to fear sacrifice for love of God. Her story teaches that true freedom is born of fidelity to a conscience enlightened by faith, and that purity is not weakness, but inner strength. Many priests recommend that young people make Saint Maria Goretti their intercessor in temptations against chastity. Her protection is invoked at spiritual retreats and in moments of personal prayer. Devotion to Maria also recalls that holiness does not depend on age. Even a child can reach the heights of Christian heroism. The simplicity of her life shows that holiness is possible for everyone. In the testimonies of those who seek her intercession, there are accounts of profound family reconciliations. Separated couples, children estranged from parents, and people imprisoned by resentment find strength to forgive by meditating on her story. Saint Maria Goretti is a sign of contradiction for a society marked by selfishness and the pursuit of pleasure at any cost. Her name has become a silent appeal to purity of heart and fidelity to the gospel. The saint's spiritual heritage does not belong only to the past. Each new generation finds in Maria's life a bright beacon pointing to Christ, the source of all purity and peace. Her example remains ever alive. Today, thousands of people continue to visit her shrine in Nettuno. There, amid the silence, many feel she is a close friend, an older sister who tenderly intercedes for those who struggle to live the faith. The memory of Saint Maria Goretti has also become an invitation to conversion. Her aggressor, Alessandro Serenelli, went from criminal to penitent, showing that no sin is greater than God's mercy. That lesson completes the greatness of her testimony. As we recall Maria Goretti's life, we are invited to rediscover the beauty of purity, the power of forgiveness, and the courage to remain faithful to God, even when the world seems to say otherwise. Her sanctity will continue to inspire hearts until the end of time.